I'm here with Tom Kieley, the co-founder and CEO at SourceDay. SourceDay is a B2B SaaS company. They sell a supply chain software that allows buyers and suppliers to collaborate in real time about price, quantity, and delivery dates. They are now around 100 people and north the 10 million ARR mark, growing fast. Tom, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. I appreciate the time today.
Cool. Maybe we can just for context a little bit, I shared some stats there. Can you just share kind of what exact problem you solve and for what type of customer? And maybe you can even give an example of a company that you work with and how they use you.
Yeah, absolutely. SourceDay, as you mentioned, is a true SaaS platform or a network, if you will. And we primarily serve manufacturing organizations. So think anything from industrial components, aerospace, transportation, packaging equipment, oil and gas, electric vehicles, you name it. We have customers in over 22 manufacturing SIC codes. We also serve some customers in apparel, health and beauty, consumer products, and then distribution organizations as well. A good example is really all of those organizations have one thing in common at a minimum, is that they rely on buying and procuring parts, finished goods, raw materials, or otherwise components that go into their finished products, whether it's distribution or all the way through to a discrete manufacturer. And the largest challenge with that is in the buying process, those buying individuals live in Excel and email and manual processes for every PO from every supplier. So our typical customer buys hundreds to thousands of components from 50 to hundreds of suppliers, and they do it in Excel. So there's very little data or process or consistency in how you can have visibility of what's coming inbound and, more importantly, what's not coming inbound. So trying to keep it short, we help organizations by integrating tightly with their ERP systems that are what actually create the purchase order demand of the materials to keep production moving. And anything from a 5-cent component that goes into a school bus to a full engine that goes into a school bus can stop production dead in its track. And they generally don't get visibility to that until it's too late. So SourceDay does 100% PO automation delivery to the suppliers, whether it's a new PO or changes, expedites, cancellations, move outs to purchase orders that are critical updates and components that suppliers need real-time visibility to so that they can react and ensure that they're delivering accurately on quantity and date to suppliers, to their customers, to keep production moving. So we're a real-time PO collaboration platform, enabling buyers and suppliers to be in sync more real time and manage inbound supply risk.
Makes sense. I'm curious, why did you start this company? Were you in that space already when you started it, or how did you stumble upon this problem, let's say?
Great question. My co-founder and I both have manufacturing backgrounds. My co-founder was the GM of a manufacturing company in the discrete electronic component for oil and gas primarily. And they ran an ERP that did a great job building the PO demand, but then, like all ERPs, it was really an inside looking platform. So they had to go into Excel and email to collaborate with suppliers. Right. And so their biggest challenge was every day and every week looking forward, what were they able to actually staff for and build based on materials and inventory of what would be available to ship. So my background also was in manufacturing. I worked at Dell for many years and saw really what true great manufacturing processes can look like. But you'd still have the component of suppliers creating downtime or production stops. And so Clint and I came together through our passion and seeing real life example of production and supply chain gaps in technology to create and build a first of its kind platform, the not your portal, if you will, for manufacturers to collaborate with your suppliers.
And by the way, I feel like for every probably software startup, the biggest competitor is an Excel sheet. Seems to be like it's always that.
at some point that, in any change, right, the first entry to a market is competing against status quo or
Totally.
Excel.
Totally. Yeah. The company was founded in 2016.
We got our first customers in production in late 2015.
Okay. I'm curious, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like manufacturing is more of a traditional old industry, maybe slower moving, slower to adjust and adopt new technologies, right? If you are SaaS selling to SaaS startups, like they're constantly playing around with new tools and they're happy to try something new. What have you learned? One, is that correct? And then two, what have you learned selling to an audience like that and, change management, convincing them to try something new?
I think you're dead on. Right? I think the industries that we serve are what make the world move and a better place, because everything we consume has gone through some sort of manufacturing process at some point. So without them, there really is no product and no innovation and really no industry. No, with that though, the manufacturing processes and the manufacturing organizations are very challenging organizations to operate, generally on lower margins and very tight cash flows. So to your point, they invest mostly in equipment and machinery and driving efficiency on the shop floor or selling faster, right? So for a long time, they really had not focused on, you've automated the selling and selling as much as you possibly can with marketing and sales automation and CPQs and all of those tools that make it really efficient to buy. But then you have the opposite side of the organization, the manufacturers that have to go procure the parts to keep up with the fast and rapid sales demand. And so, to your point, it's been an evolution for manufacturers to start to look at more adoption of technology, and it's been slow. It's manufacturers are generally laggards in technology adoption, but we're beginning to see since COVID much faster adoption, much more optionality in technology and using it to solve real challenges within the organization where supply chain technology wasn't something that was widely spoken about pre-COVID. We were arguably very early to market, and COVID, as tragic as it was an accelerant for the gaps that existed in supply chain that were just really being masked or otherwise avoided. And so now there's definitely an accelerant, and we're seeing great tailwinds from focus on supply chain and technology.
If you would talk to a founder who's trying to penetrate the market or, like slow moving industries, is there any advice that you can give on how to approach it?
I think it's definitely know your customer and really understand where and how they buy or decide where to invest. It's not just as easy as throwing, ads on social media and, just going to events and trade shows. I think it's truly understanding the ICP, so your ideal customer profile, focusing on that customer profile, and iterating on it over time as you scale, but focusing on it and not deviating from it just to chase revenue. And then understanding the personas. So who inside of those customer profiles have the persona that can buy, that are forward thinking enough to actually look at buying something that's new to them and their organization, and that also really hold budget to buy and innovate. And then resources can also be challenged, right? You got to make sure they have the resources to implement technology in what you're serving. So it's an iterative process, but understanding ICP and persona is an absolute critical evolution, and it's not static. It definitely changes.
And then I'm sure, people talk about, I forgot the name, there's like early adopters, early majority. With software like that, you need to find, especially if you're a new startup and you don't have yet the reference and the case studies and the logos on the website and the 10 million plus in revenue, but you're just starting out, you need to find those few risk takers who are willing to take a shot on you. How do you, looking back at, 2015, 2016, when you were, how do you find those people? How do you identify those who after talking with you a little bit will actually be down to try it versus the ones that will just go nowhere and they will just ghost you or talk to you forever but never actually take the step to try you out?
Yeah. Yeah, the perpetual tire kickers are real in every industry,
Hmm.
and it's not intentional. I think it's that they would like to buy, but they've just not been empowered or enabled to buy. And that's again getting to the right person in the organization. When we launched SourceDay, specific ERP ecosystem, ERP that had a significant number of customers in our target audience,
Mm.
and we went to their user group events. And so we would, go travel to their user group and get in front of their customers, where they were already kind of technology as the point of the user group. And so we went to our first user group late 2015, and we were able to buy a sponsorship and present. It was very affordable at the time, but it's gotten much more expensive for these trade shows and events now. But we were able to build kind of our first presence or awareness in that very small targeted audience. I think there were maybe 400 companies at that conference. And we left there and shortly after got our first 3 customers.
Hmm.
But it took being present and not just in a virtual, but actually showing that we were a real organization with a product and a value. We had 0 customers, so you had to sell a lot of future and a lot of confidence.
Right. Yeah. Do you still sell it up through physical events, or is it now post-COVID environment? It's become much easier to do everything virtually.
Definitely still both. We're not as reliant on the physical in-person events as we were as a younger organization. To your point, we've been much better at digital marketing and building awareness, meeting our customers where they're educating themselves on technology, and then also really still working very closely with referral and channel partner relationships that own the customer today and can bring us in, whether it's a change management project or a digital transformation initiative or otherwise. There are systems integrators and partners that own these relationships that can really help bring you in as a value add to the customer.
Totally. Again, going back to the 2015, 2016, 2017 days, maybe your first million in ARR, because that's where a lot of our audience is. Is there anything, and I think you guys sell into mid-market, so it's not fast transactional sales cycles, right? You have to really work people, and I'm sure they're not small deals that you guys sell. Is there anything you wish you would have known back at that point that you know now, or maybe advice you would give to founders that are at that stage and starting something up, getting their first
The
customers?
first, yeah, absolutely. Good question. The first million, can be frustrating. Some organizations get there unnaturally fast, and then maybe hit a wall at some point. But there's always kind of that early hurdle that you have to get to, whether it's 1 million or 500,000 or 5 million or 10. But it can feel like a lifetime. I think a couple of the really early challenges that we faced were understanding pricing and how best to optimize pricing for our customers based on the value we were delivering. I think our first customers were paying is in the low thousands of dollars per year, where we're now, 5-6 figures per year per customer on average. So it's, we've come a long way in product value, but I would say, we didn't come that far. So I think our early price point was arguably too low. And we didn't quite understand the value to the business yet. And we didn't do enough diligence and really understanding what is consumable from a price or budget based on the value. So having an ROI early on that can really justify the price point that will get you there faster, but optimizing for scale, not just a higher ACV. So there's a balance between being priced too high and being priced too low. That can limit your scalability on logo and customer traction. So I think it's getting to that first million can be frustrating. But I remember the day like it was yesterday and the celebration that followed and ensued. I think it's important to celebrate every milestone, and 1 million was certainly our first major milestone, and then 10 million and beyond, which we've accomplished. It's critical to continue to learn from how you got to where you are and what's going to get you to the next level of growth.
Which milestone sticks out to you as the most, to you personally, the most emotion? Can be a revenue milestone, can be a different type of
Yeah.
milestone. Anyone that sticks out?
I think it was probably getting to 1 million in
Mm-hmm.
annual recurring revenue. I think that was when we really knew we had had enough traction in logos and customer retention, because you have to have good retention to get to 1 million and beyond. It can't just be through new logos. Depending on your business model, that can be an expensive proposition depending on your cost to acquire. But the million was most certainly the most memorable. But celebrate them all.
Totally. Were you doing the selling in the early days, or your co-founder?
Great question. He and I did everything at one point, except for writing code. So he was primarily doing the sales motion. I was the sales engineer, so I was doing the demos as a little bit more on the technical side. And then shortly after a customer would sign a contract, I would do the onboarding and training and support, and he would help a little bit with the integration side. But we wore 4 or 5, 6 hats per day.
What have you learned about the right time to hire and delegate sales hires?
I think what was unique, my co-founder and I both come from sales backgrounds, so we really hung on to that, I think, unnaturally longer than some. But it certainly, depending on your strengths, it is something that you need to have the right person. So if you don't have or come from a sales background, it is critical to bring in a strong seller that can kind of create repeatability and process and that muscle to go hire, grow, and retain good sales talent, but also do the sales motion on acquiring new customers. I would do that as quickly as you possibly can if you don't have a sales background. But otherwise, play to your strengths as founders, and definitely recognize your weaknesses and hire those spaces as you can.
Right. I'm curious, what's your take on founder-led marketing? I don't know who you pay attention to, but Jason Lemkin from SaaStr, Nathan Latka from Founder Path, Chris Walker, there's a couple of CEOs and founders who are very public in the content that they share and kind of scaling their own brand and expertise. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely critical. As founders, you need to build your brand and thought leadership behind you as founders, so that there's belief that you're solving the problem and that you're the right people to solve the problem. Because they're not just investing in the company as a customer; they're really investing and buying in on you as founders to create a lasting and high value platform and solution for them as companies willing to pay you money for your service. We early started doing our own marketing. We created all of our own nurture campaigns. We did all of our own social posting. Knew nothing about any of that, but you just iterate and test and see what works. And our very first email that we sent to all of our prospects and the lists that we would buy and obtain is probably looked at today by marketing experts as probably the worst written email in the history of first emails, but it did work for some reason. So I guess objectively,
then it's not the worst.
As bad as it looks. Yeah, it looks bad. It was not appealing to the eyes, but it did accomplish what we needed it to.
Right. Yeah, love it. I know you and your co-founder wrote a book, right, about your journey of scaling SourceDay.
We did. It was, I think one thing I can say to any founder is, take daily or weekly journal and notes and, remember the highs and the lows. And that's what I was able to use, at least in my section of the book, to really retain and remember some of the moments that, were both good and bad. But it was also a lot of fun. Yeah. We published a book, our marketing leader had us do something to really create for trade shows and events to put out as brand awareness. And also just, I enjoyed it because a lot of founders and CEOs were mentors to me along the journey. And so being able to give back from lessons we learned along the way is important to me.
So was the book, I'm just personally curious, was the book just purely kind of like a passion project of, we want to share our lesson and our journey and give back? Or did it fit somehow into your go-to-market marketing strategy awareness?
It's called Startup Lessons Learned Along the Way. So I think by name, it's more catered towards startup founders and others. To your point, I think in my marketing leader now has said we probably missed an opportunity to tell more about why SourceDay and what the value is to the industries we serve, and have a little bit more of a selling value or marketability behind it for our business. So I think it's catered more so to just founders and startups that are trying to identify and solve and build a solution and market. But it does a little of both, but probably more on the startup side.
Yeah. I'm curious if you're open to share, is there any like darkest moment or darkest day that you remember where you were really like at the bottom?
Yeah, that's a tough one to share. I think it's where I think even as founders, where you have a sense of imposter syndrome, or why me, right? Why am I, able or not able to do this role and to deliver and create this company or this value? And I think, without sharing any one specific example, I think all founders go through imposter syndrome at some stage or several stages throughout the organization. And really overcoming that by getting mentorship and seeking advice and outside counsel from others that you can share kind of what's not working. Right. Because you can't always share everything with your co-founder. You can't always share everything with your significant other because they may not truly relate. So you need to have mentors and others that have been there and done that to pick you up during those dark moments and help you make the hard decisions. And a lot of it comes down, I think, without oversharing, of, hire fast and fire slow is a saying that I think most everyone knows, but I think no one really actually puts into practice conceptually to the meaning of it, which really means fire fast, right? You will know in your gut when people are the wrong fit or you've outgrown people, and the longer they stay, you're hurting the business and probably them in their career. So I think that's something that was really dark and hard for me, is, moving on from executives that you have built great relationships with. But the business or otherwise has changed, and you need a different individual with different experiences.
Do you hire friends or family, or is that a hard no?
Yeah, little known. Our business. So we did have a fractional CFO who happened to also share my last name. He also raised me. So I think it was a fractional role. I think from a full-time standpoint, it's a dangerous proposition, and it can create unhealthy attributes within the business if you're not careful. I think it can work. And in our case, my father was a very well experienced, successful CFO in the tech industry, and was able to help us at a young, early stage make sure that our books and FP&A and all the budgeting and planning were done very sophisticated and really with a lot of thought behind them. So it can work, but I would caution the role and capacity of which you bring someone full time in.
Right. Makes sense. On imposter syndrome, I deal with it. You said a lot of founders deal with it. What do you tell yourself, or how do you deal with it?
Depends on the day, I suppose. Some days I may deal with it better than others. And I think the best advice is to really take a step back and appreciate the stage that you're at and what you have created and the team and the people around you. And remember that, that you've got a support staff, hopefully of mentors and others, to help get through whatever the decision or moment is that is giving you that sense of doubt. Because effectively, imposter syndrome is a feeling of doubt in yourself that can prevent you from, making the hard decisions or really moving the business forward. So I always just like to take a step back and appreciate where we are and say, look, very few companies get to this stage, whatever stage you're at. It's still a stage that very few companies get to in the grand scheme of all companies. And so appreciate the moment and appreciate the scale and stage, and then focus on where you want to get to and what's realistic.
Right. I think I read only 0.4% of companies make it to 10 million, and that's only 0.4% of the companies who actually survive a certain year, because obviously not any random person who starts any random thing actually, makes it even through the first year. So I've
seen similar.
Yeah. We talked about darkest day from, the book or the journey. Any other highlights besides hitting 1 million in ARR that stick out? Any story that, is near and dear to your heart?
I think all of our customer stories, right, where we can identify and kind of hear them say that we help them save a customer or help them save X dollars, or we've helped them grow. One of the most recent ones was we had a customer since COVID, I think for the first 2 years post-COVID, they grew 3X without hiring a single head in their operations function, which is where we support.
Right.
So they were correlating a piece of that to SourceDay.
Right.
And so when you can actually point to real value that your platform or your service, whatever you've created, is actually delivering, that's hard to do. Most organizations, that kind of get it to a later stage can still struggle to say that they're creating real hard value to their customers in a must-have manner. And getting to that moment is something to really be proud of. And I think other critical moments for us is people. When we get to promote from within, more recently we've promoted a handful of people to directors and senior directors and a VP who've been with us for many years and have really shown great growth and overall capacity to really think bigger for the organization. And watching people grow and watching their careers grow and helping to be a small part of that is pretty incredible and rewarding.
How would you, you're now at beyond 10 million ARR. How would you describe your priorities now? Like how are you spending your day to day? What do you see as the biggest lever that you need to be focusing on as the CEO now to take the company to the next stage?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's, I think part of what a lot of CEOs struggle with is like, really what is your day-to-day job? And it can be very fluid, right? I think some days you can have things that pull you in directions, whether it's a customer issue or a growth issue or a personnel issue, all the way through to, facilities. You have to own and take part in all of it. So, what I try to do is over the years, I've learned what my strengths are, and I've hired strong executives where I otherwise don't have the strength, capacity, or willingness to do those functions. And then I spend and focus my time really on aligning the organization to strategy, aligning the organization to our targets and our goals. Many times creating kind of the crazy long-term goal that's going to stretch us and really showing and proving why I believe and why as an organization we can get there if we all stay focused. So it's strategy, it's focus, it's not letting distractions creep into any part of the organization. So really keeping focus and control on what is it we're trying to accomplish in the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months and not chasing any shiny objects. I've had past history where, it's easy to go see a shiny object from a customer's request or from an opportunity that may present itself, but it's not within the core of your business. So I now focus most of my time on our board, making sure our cash runway and health and long-term viability of the business continues to stay and go in the right direction. And then strategic partnerships. I spend a lot of time really building and strategizing on partnerships that are going to be meaningful and mutual to really be something that both parties will lean into and help deliver value to both sides and growth ultimately from the value.
And specifically, I'm just super curious, and I know that this will, every CEO's day to day looks different. And some are more sales oriented, some are more product oriented. So every CEO is different. So I understand that this will not necessarily apply to what people should do. But when you say, aligning the leadership around strategy, does that mean, let's say you set a revenue goal, you say this is what we want to hit by the end of the year, and then are you in weekly meetings with your head of sales and your head of marketing and your CFO, and you talk through and you keep them accountable? Do you write memos and it's like, here's how we get there? I'm just literally like, specifically, what does that look like?
Yes. Yeah. So I think that's, to your point, I spend probably half of my time or more in meetings, mostly with functional leaders. So sales, growth, marketing channels, product leaders. I spend a lot of time with my CFO to make sure we have the right targets. Have we set achievable targets? Have we set a target that's too easy? And make sure that we're really aligned on, because the targets can change. Generally want them to go in a positive direction, but if you've overstretched on the target, you need to evaluate that as well and make the hard decision. But my time is generally spent, I do a weekly forecast meeting with my sales leader, and we do a weekly growth or pipeline focused meeting to make sure, is the health of our pipeline going in the right direction? If not, is it an ICP focus? Is it a go-to-market channel focus? Where are we gapping, and what can we do to continue to iterate and improve? And then I spend, a long staff meeting with my leadership team once a week to really just listen to obstacles, blockers, challenges, or what's working. And make sure everyone in the leadership team is up to speed and aligned on kind of current priorities and current progress. What's holding us up, what is new and exciting. And then beyond that, I'm customer facing as much as I can. Always try to be in front of all customers, no matter the size. Make sure that we're learning from our customers, because that can correlate to product innovation where we need to make investments. And also hear things that others may not hear, as I'm speaking to analysts and others as well. That can tie directly into some customer value we can create.
Right. So many questions. One, what have you learned about setting good targets?
They're hard. I think you have to set smart goals, right? I mean, they've got to be achievable. They've got to be attainable. They've got to also have some stretch component to them, where it's, pushing beyond your prior success or your prior growth. But I think every department needs to have metrics that are visible, accountable, and constantly being evaluated. And it's not just a sales or a growth target. It's also, is product meeting its deadlines and delivering products, and is development being efficient and developing new functionality? Is support responsive to customer support tickets and trouble tickets? Is our client success team doing the functional activities that drive retention and customer value? So every department, I think, has goals that we set and iterate quarterly, and try to make them an incremental improvement over the prior quarter, and continually, though, stretching the team to continually beat and do more.
So smart goals, every department needs to have goals, not just sales. It needs to be attainable, but also it needs to have a stretch component in it, so it's just not too easy to reach and people get lazy.
Exactly.
So you mentioned that you spend a good chunk of your time on strategic partnerships. Does that mean, if I understand it correctly, that at your current stage, you see one of the biggest levers to growth, not anymore, how many cold emails can we send, and can we have a couple more phone calls a day, but really finding a couple of key other companies who maybe share an audience with you, where you can find a mutual agreement, where, a partnership. So is that correct, that this is at this stage different to just sending more cold emails?
Exactly. Yeah, I think there's several ways to look at partnerships, right? There's components of our platform that kind of bleed into other business aspects that solutions already exist for. but we're very synergistic in our target audience, the customers we're serving, the personas we're selling to, and the challenges that we're mutually solving, are really tied together. So most of the partnerships that I spend my time on are where we're growing our install base with the partner's install base and vice versa. So where there's a mutual ability, in my experience, if it's not mutual, it's going to almost certainly fail unless you brute force it, right?
That's not a partnership.
It's not a partnership. No, and you can have a partnership that is your platform is adding value to their customers. But if their platform, if you can't help them grow their revenue with your customers, meaning sell their product into your install base, it's more challenging, and you'll kind of become a shiny object for a little while, and then it may make its course out, right? Where it's just kind of a fad. So our partnerships are almost always mutually exclusive in giving mutual value, in reselling, co-selling, or referring each other's products into each other's customer bases with intent of there being significant customer value, not just a nice to have. Right. And they're hard to find, they're hard to identify, and they're even harder to make successful in market. Signing partner paperwork is generally pretty easy. Creating a press release after the partnership is really easy. But then in practice, going to market together, bringing organizations together that are both different and built different, is challenging. So you have to find organizations that you also kind of work well with culturally.
Right. Makes sense. What have you learned about fundraising? Because according to Crunchbase, you guys have raised over 57 million, which is a lot of money. Any lessons that stick out there on founders who are raising, or maybe raise a seed round, trying to raise an A round?
I think the way I approach fundraising is, it can become a very time consuming and huge distraction. And it can be a permanent distraction where you're just, perpetually in a state of fundraising, it feels like. Or you can do it more systematically. What I have come from is I've created relationships with several strategics that I continuously keep up to date and in constant contact with, so that when we need to go raise a round, it's not me creating a list and cold outreaching and sending decks around and trying to build interest. I've already built the interest in theory. Leading up to a fundraising moment. And that does take a certain amount of effort and attention and focus in a perpetual state, right? Where I do time box, several hours a month where I'm just dedicating it to keeping up with strategic growth, equity, private equity, venture.
And that's investors. Every month, even when you're not actively fundraising?
It is. Sometimes, there'll be maybe a month where I don't have a call scheduled, but I'm quarterly for sure. I'm spending several hours meeting with several firms. So we were fortunate, in our B and our C, were both led by firms that I'd had several years of relationship with behind, where they knew the business, they were excited about the growth, they kind of already been watching the growth, and I've been keeping them up to date on the things that matter over the years prior leading up to it, so that the fundraising component of actually getting to diligence was much faster, and the diligence process itself was much faster. So I think spending a little time over the course of time, rather than trying to crunch it all into 3 or 4 months, is much less of a distraction, because that 3 or 4 months where you're just heads down focused and just fundraising, a lot of bad things can happen.
Totally. No, that's super smart. How has your thinking changed on fundraising in this new market environment? Some people call it, a software recession. How has your thinking changed on how you approach it, how to plan it, etc.?
Yeah, I think every organization needs to kind of get to default alive, right? Where you're not burning money for the sake of burning money. There's healthy burn, I think, where there's significant growth, and there's intentional burn where you're investing ahead of significant growth to kind of scale growth even further. But the times I think we've all spoken about and everyone keeps hearing is, burn at all costs and grow at all costs are for the moment behind us. I'll never say never. The pendulum can swing back in an instant. But I think it's rewarding now, looking at some profitability and being able to see light at the end of the tunnel and saying we're actually not just creating customer value, we're also truly creating cash flow, right? Where the business can be self-sustaining and really you can kind of dictate and control your own destiny. So I think there's investment in growth that has to be made at certain times that can create burn again. But, they're being subject to being forced into fundraising can be a painful experience in this market. So I would focus on healthy, smart growth and some component of break even, neutral, or even profitability.
How do you get to profitability or default alive? And it seems like an obvious question, right? But what are the levers? What are the structural changes that companies might need to make that they don't want to make, et cetera?
Yeah, you have to make very hard decisions as a leader. And in some cases, admitting overhiring, or in the moment, it may not have been overhiring, but in the present, it now on the surface is some aspect or some level of overhiring, or just ultimately growth will slow at some point. All right, from growing from 1 to 5 to 10 to 15, and then starts at some point growth, as a percent will start to slow.
Totally.
And you should start to see economies of scale, right? Where you've built efficiencies and an ability to grow without having to add that same incremental amount of dollar cost to the business. The easiest, I think, part of the ability to get to that level of financial health is really focus. Don't try to be everything to every customer all at once. And in our history, we did, have several kind of product innovation, laboratory experiments where you're trying to go and develop and build and innovate in directions where you probably didn't need to, because you had a core product that was really differentiated in market and growing really fast enough. And so focus and making hard decisions to stay focused and not let customers or the market take you down, a shiny object that isn't your core focus to your organization. It's easy as a young company to get distracted by other potential problems that you could solve that may look important to your business at some point, but today staying focused is the most healthy thing. And in doing so, long-term can build a sustainable, alive, default alive business.
Love it. Last couple of questions. Any CEOs or founders you look up to or learn from?
There's several, in Austin that, may or may not be more well known. I think Rob Taylor was more recently the CEO of Convey, which was acquired by Project 44, I think back in 2021 or 22. Great mentor that's been of great help through hard decisions. And I think there was a period of my career where I worked at Dell, and Michael Dell and what he's, I think, created in kind of the new Dell is truly nothing short of amazing. And, the growth of that company has just been incredible to watch. And I've had the pleasure of meeting him a handful of times, and just really watching his journey and his own personal growth has been pretty incredible. And then I also just have a really incredibly strong board. My independent board member is a former executive of Dell, who really challenges us in all the right ways to stay focused and look at what matters and continue to drive more customer value.
Love it. All right, last question. As the CEO and as you go through these growth stages from starting to first customers to 1 million to 5 million to 10 million, you constantly need to level up as a person and as a leader and as a human and as a friend, how are you, leveling up? And that might be anything from reading a book to doing events to whatever it is. How are you making sure that you're keeping up with the demands of a scaling company?
Yeah, and it changes always. I had a coach earlier on in my journey, the name of Kirk Dando, who was my CEO coach, and then some leadership coach for some other members of my team. That was really incredible through our journey. And then now I'm more newly a member of the YPO chapter here in Austin, which gets me in front of a lot more leaders and of all different stages of growth and success, where you can learn from, and they've been through similar challenges, obstacles, or decisions that you get to bring and talk through as a part of the YPO forums. So I think constantly being open and accepting and seeking outside advice from those that have been there and done that, knowing what you don't know, and being okay with that, and seeking outside help always. I'm always reading and listening to more listening, I think, during my commute, but listening to books. Currently listening to Elon Musk's biography, and
Walter Isaacson.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
It's a good one.
Whether no matter what your opinion is, I think you can learn from the successes, right? And I think, but always be learning. I probably spend too much time talking about work and talking with people about work, but I think that also creates opportunities to learn from other people that have had different experiences.
No, I love that. And the book, I love I don't know if you're at that point at the book, the algorithm that he kind of defined. It's such a great book. Amazing.
Yeah,
thank you so much for your time. This was great. I think there's lots of stories and nuggets here for people. And we'll link both your LinkedIn profile and SourceDay, your company, down below in the description. So anyone who wants to connect with you or check out SourceDay, they can find you guys there. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.